You're so pretty, if only you lost a few pounds, I would
Are you
love to get
serious?
you.
Someone who's calling up a reference and saying, "What's this girl's dress size?" They genuinely think that's okay to ask. In my opinion, you should say, "Go screw yourself. That's a ridiculous question. Never call me again."
Sarah and Max, an unlikely pair in this wild podcast. They're the perfect flair. Sarah's charm, so feminine and free. A Cali girl spirit under the podcast tree. Max, a strong force with a punch in every word. Together, they navigate the dating absurd. Don't forget to hit subscribe, join the crew for more laughs and tales just for you. Now back to the show.
Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of Good for Shidduchim. I am your host, Sarah Levine, and I have my co-host with me, Max Landisman, all the way in Teaneck, New Jersey. We also have a really special guest with us today. We're very, very excited to have her on. She has a lot to say, and she's a published author herself. Before we get into who we have on today, I just wanted to let you guys know to email us at goodforshidduchim@gmail.com or follow us on Instagram, which is at goodforshidduchim. Like us, subscribe to our page, and listen to us wherever you guys listen to your podcasts. And without further ado, I just wanted to introduce Elizabeth Bergmen. Welcome, Elizabeth.
Hi, thank you so much.
We actually go back. We go way back. Elizabeth and I know each other from being roommates. So I actually was very aware of what you were specializing in, and I thought it would be like perfect for an episode, especially now that we're talking about Shidduchim. So we basically wanted to have you on the podcast because you specialize in eating disorders, and I wanted somebody to kind of integrate that into the Shidduch system, which you have. So if you want to just introduce yourself and take it away, that'd be great.
Okay, sure. Yeah, so I am a therapist, and I treat women with eating disorders, some in the frum community, some I'd say mostly not in the frum community, but I have seen quite a few in the Jewish world. Yeah, what can I tell you about myself?
How did you get into this? Because this is, it's a very specific thing that you're doing.
Yeah,
Yeah, well, I mean, your background is you're a you have your MSW, right? Like you have your master's.
I have a master's in counseling. Um,
Hmm.
yeah, I'm from Chicago. I went to Turo with Sarah, and then I went to Columbia for my master's. And I've been working in the field since then. How I got into it is a bit random, but I was planning to go into psychology anyway, and I started to notice during seminary and during my time in college that there were just tons of people on diets, and not just on diets, but like just having this really twisted relationship with food. Um, like I remember seeing people in seminary, one of them just walking down the street in Israel, and she was eating a cookie and someone knocked the cookie out of her hand. And she was like, "Hey, why'd you do that?" And she said, "Because just remember, I'm doing you a favor. This cookie will never taste as good as skinny feels."
What?
And I think that
So crazy.
yeah, and I think it's actually since then I've come across it, and I think apparently it's a quote from a famous model. And I just happened to overhear, these girls speaking, and they must have been 17 or 18 and talking about how they wouldn't get dates, if they gained weight in seminary. And I was really horrified by it because it's not something I grew up from, but not in that kind of shidduch mentality. And I thought that it was just beyond crazy. And when I was in college, I just started reading about it, and I felt like it would be a really important niche to be addressed because there aren't that many from therapists who specialize in the topic. And it's such a huge topic and it's so damaging, obviously, in so many ways. People die of eating disorders all the time. And I think, especially because of the shidduch system and just because of Jewish culture, it's a very different mentality than non-Jews with eating disorders. And I think that not most, but I would say a lot of non-Jewish therapists, they wouldn't necessarily understand those nuances. So that is basically how I got into it. I hope that answers.
Yeah, definitely. If I may ask, what is the biggest difference between the non-Jewish world with this and the Jewish world?
Um, I mean, this is just based on my experience and based on, my opinion. This isn't,
Okay,
research
yeah.
backed, but I think in general, in the Jewish community, especially in the more right wing Jewish community, there is just so much pressure on girls and women in the dating system to look a certain way or to be a certain way. And I think even beyond that, there is pressure to also just kind of look that way. But then there's also this culture that doesn't exist, I think, in many other cultures of, cooking for Shabbos and you have to cook, you know, tons and tons of meals and you have, you know, like I have patients who tell me about like their Christmas meals and how they get so triggered by them. And in my head, I'm laughing because it's literally just Shabbos and we
Right.
have
Right.
two of those meals at least every single week. And I think there's just this pressure on women sometimes to cook all of these meals, but then not eat the food, or somehow eat the food, but then still somehow look a certain way and have, however many kids in a row and then still, maintain a certain type of figure. And it's just a bit crazy in terms of how unrealistic it is.
Hmm.
Um, and it's also just not really, I mean, sometimes it's spoken about, but I think it's just kind of a given. And in the non-Jewish community, there's obviously other pressures. And I think there's some pressures there that don't exist as much in the frum community, like bikini season, or, I mean, Jews can wear bikinis, but, depending on the community, not everyone will have that. Um, but yeah, it's just I think different. There's pros and cons in both.
Right. That's really interesting that I never thought of like somebody who has disordered eating or an eating disorder would like think that like it's a lot of pressure, I guess, like you said, like when you're cooking a lot and you're supposed to be kind of like have the best desserts, the best everything, and like you yourself have to look the best. So in order for that to happen, like you have to have a lot of discipline and control and like that I really never thought of that.
Yeah.
In terms of somebody who has gone through a shidduch system and it is now married and had this eating disorder or disordered eating during that time and now has a trigger now. So that's an
Yeah,
interesting thought.
yeah, the food is definitely a huge trigger, and it's hard because I know with my non-Jewish patients, like they'll often just avoid big family meals or they'll avoid things like that. And I think that if you want to be in the frum community and you want to be in the frum world, you don't want to avoid all of those things, but being surrounded by it is so difficult. And
Mhm.
on top of that, I think there's also just so many, sometimes well-intentioned, sometimes not, comments from people.
Shadchanim?
No, not even shadchanim, just anyone. I don't really want to give examples because I don't know who's listening and I don't want to share people's stories, but I've just heard horrible things that I don't think were meant in a mean way by the people who said them, but just so many comments, the typical like, you're so pretty, if only you lost a few pounds, I would
Are you
love to set you
serious?
up. Things like that I think are so common. And I mean, that's not even, the bad things I've heard. I've heard ones that are just really, really horrendous.
Mhm.
Um, and so I think it's just hard, even, as a single person going to a wedding or, whatever it might be. And then, people might say, oh, please God by you. And it's very often, I think there are comments thrown in about people's weight. And yeah, it's really painful and inappropriate, but I think it's also just unfortunately the norm, even though it's not
Mhm.
normal.
From also what I've heard
Right.
behind closed doors, which of course I don't think gets publicized enough, of when you're sitting with a shotgun in a private room. I think any girl has got who's in the shidduch system has been there one way or another, and not necessarily saying this happened to them, but there are a lot of girls out there that basically the shotgun just says to their face, knowing that they really want to get married. That's a big goal in their life. And to say like, oh, you're not going to get married unless you lose 10 pounds or 20 pounds or whatever. So, don't even bother.
Yeah, I think I also set people up, and I think it's really hard. I think we always criticize shadchanim for these things, but I think from the other side of it, and I don't want to say it's only men because it's not, and I've seen women who are very fussy about looks. But I think as somebody who has set people up in the past and still does, it is really hard because I think there are the likeliness that people will say yes to people of a certain weight is so low, and you want to help the girls get as many dates as they can. So I think obviously there's a sensitive way to say things, and I will never say anything to someone about their weight unless, they ask my explicit opinion, and even then I'm unlikely to say something like that. But I think it is hard. I think some of those shadchanim who say that just to kind of be Dan Lakavsklis, I think that some of them are trying to look out for the girls because they don't want them to get hurt. But it's
While
not
hurting them.
either way, it's not okay to say it, but I
Right.
think it's hard to
Not
be.
to get hurt in what way? Like they they're gonna get hurt by somebody's talking about their weight. What do you mean like
Yeah,
for them not to get
exactly.
hurt
That's
either
what I'm
way?
saying. It's the wrong way to go about it because they are hurting them by saying it.
Right.
It's tricky. I think you have to just kind of keep your
Yeah.
mouth shut unless you really have a nice way of saying something. Um,
Hmm.
I, I I think it's not really a shadchan's place to say anything about weight. I think it's one thing if you maybe say like, you know, this isn't the most flattering picture of you, but that's not saying the person is ugly. They're just,
Exactly.
commenting
Right.
on, how the picture is. But I think weight wise, it's just not
My,
really appropriate to comment.
my
Hmm.
biggest issue with it is, as you said, the way they say it more in a black and white way, where you're saying, um, if you don't lose weight, you will never get married. Meaning, if you don't go on a diet or do XYZ, you'll never get married, which is definitely not true, right? I totally agree. I'm not taking away from like it may be harder to set up. There's no question. There's no question there, but that doesn't mean you got to say like I know that 100% you will never meet anyone unless you lose weight, which is ridiculous in my opinion. I think there's someone out there for everyone. Everyone likes different things, but that's where I'm getting at is the way they say it for sure.
Yeah, definitely. And I mean, I think if if we believe in God the way we're supposed to, then we, believe that things happen when they're meant to happen. And I know for I mean, it took me years to meet my husband, and in those years of being single, I remember friends of mine getting married who some of them were quite heavy and they got married really young and they're happily married. And I know others who were really objectively, beautiful and thin, and some of them are still single. So I think, as you're saying, it's not true that someone isn't going to get married if they don't look a certain way. Um, yeah, it's definitely a problem.
Right. That's what I was thinking. It's like, who are they to say, like, you have to lose a couple pounds in order for you to get married? It's like one thing coming from a matchmaker other than coming from like a nutritionist or a doctor who's telling them, to be healthy and have a healthy lifestyle. This is what I suggest. Um, I wanted to ask you, Elizabeth, like, do you feel that I know that we talked about shotguns and them and they mentioning weight, but do you feel like the overall shidduch system itself like is kind of hyper focused on appearance and weight in general for men and for women?
Yeah, so I think in general, again, this is not science based. I think in general, the system is much, much harder on women about this topic than men. Again, there are some people, and I'm sure there are men who struggle with their weight who get criticized for it. Um, but I think it's much more common for women to be pushed in this regard. Um, yeah, but there is this huge pressure. I don't know. I've thought about it a lot, and I don't know what the reason is. I think Judaism itself has nothing to do with it. I don't think that there's any value in Judaism of, you need to be thin, you need to look a certain way. If anything, I feel like it's really the opposite. Um, so I don't know. Maybe it's just kind of a combination of, Western society and the ideals that, society in general have put out there that's kind of, created this pattern in the frum world. I think the other thing, and this might be quite controversial, but I think,
Controversial is good.
We love controversial.
yeah, so I think the other thing that maybe combines with just like Western media, and not just media, but Western society putting this emphasis on being thin, is the shidduch system itself. I think, especially in communities where, men and women are not socializing and they're not meeting themselves, I think it's much worse. Um, Again, this is all opinion, but I think
Mm.
that even when I lived in New York, Sarah, but I used to, invite people for meals, and, I used to
Hmm.
set people up, and there were times that I would try to set people up and someone would see a resume and just say like, I'm not interested. And then if they met them at a meal, they often would say, you know what, actually, I would
I
like
changed
to,
my mind. Yeah.
yeah. And I do think that I don't want to be too cynical, and I don't want to say, men are so shallow and it's all about the photo and
That's
whatever.
okay. You can do that. It's okay.
Some of them, listen, some of them might be, but I do think, just to play devil's advocate, I was speaking to my husband about resumes, and I think the problem is, if you are a guy and you get 10 resumes that say, this girl went to Mikhlala and she's an occupational therapist and she's from New York and she has great middos. There's really nothing on paper. There's nothing distinguishing them from one another.
Thank
So
you.
Except her
obviously,
Thank
picture.
you.
exactly. So I think that, to be fair to the guys, we all sound very similar. Like, we're all in the helping professions and we all went to seminary, and, you know, we all, have certain features. And so I think if you're looking at 100 resumes like that, the only thing to really catch your eye is the picture. And so I think, if I was a guy and I was looking at all of these, it's not a matter of being shallow as much as, why not pick the one that you think is the prettiest to go out with? That being said, that's just for a date. But I think the problem is, when you're only seeing the resume, you don't get to know the person at all. And so it's possible that if you met the person at a meal, or you met them in shul, or you met them wherever, you might be like, you know what, I wouldn't have thought this person was, hugely attractive, but actually, they're so funny, or they're so charismatic, or they're so smart, or I really like talking to them. And you get to know them, and often your opinion changes. So I do think that in the more modern communities, I do think that there's still an emphasis on looks, but there's an emphasis on looks in the whole world. I think that there is much less fussiness about that when it's not just a resume.
Mm-hmm.
Can I just say, Sarah, why haven't we had Elizabeth on earlier? Because she said
Is she
something
great?
like I've been saying for a long time, and I think no one
What?
else has ever said it, was when you addressed the community, like when you're socially separated for such a long time, this is what you're going to get. So, for example, you take a guy who has been separated from the opposite gender his entire life, all of a sudden is told, don't hang around. Let's say a guy, don't hang around girls ever. He finds himself, he's 23 years old, and it's time to get married. Of course, you're going to be a prick about everything. Like, of course, you're going to want someone who's going to be perfect in every way that you see fit. Is that what you were, just to confirm, was that what you were saying? Or did I take that out of context?
I think it was more social, Elizabeth,
A
right?
little
Wasn't it
bit.
more social? Like a guy who like reverts and doesn't like socialize. That's what I took it
No,
as. Oh, okay. No,
no,
I'm wrong.
sorry, maybe I wasn't clear. I don't think it's if a guy has never spoken to girls. I think it's more just about what kind of information they're presented with. So I think a guy who is super yeshivish, even, who hasn't been exposed to, girls, and, you know, lives a fairly sheltered life. I think, as I said, if he gets 10 resumes of similar girls, he probably will pick the one he thinks is the prettiest. But if he were to meet someone who maybe he would have said no to their resume, but let's say she winds up at his family's Shabbos table, I think there's a better chance that he would say yes.
Right. That
So I think
actually
it's,
sorry, go
Like
ahead.
more in person.
yeah, I think it's just more about what information you're presented with. And if you're presented with a piece of paper, there's only so much a piece of paper says about someone, and they're all so similar. So I do think that the picture ends up being quite important
Yeah.
just because it catches your eye, as opposed to if you're at a Shabbos meal, or if you're at shul, or you're in whatever other context, you're seeing what the person looks like, but you're seeing it in the context of also how they behave and who they are, and just other things about them.
Yeah. There's a 1,000% true. As a guy, that's 100% true. I'll look at a resume. It says the same. I've been saying this for a long time. What does it say? It says who their siblings are, who their parents are, what they do. Like, I care where they're from, what schools they went to. Even sometimes they'll have a blurb. The blurb is the same thing on every girl's resume. I'm looking for someone who's family oriented, is nice, and is also family oriented. Nobody cares. If I looked at 6,000 resumes, they're all the same. It's all bullcrap,
Right.
my opinion. Of course, we're looking at the picture. I mean, I do have to defend guys here as far as I don't know what the word is, but we're definitely more visual beings. Women, I think, are more emotional. So that's like more personality wise, whatever. But that doesn't mean, like, if you look in the non-Jewish world, nobody would call their friend and say, or call someone they know and say, like, what's this girl's waist size? That's completely ridiculous. Only in this world does that happen, where it's ridiculous. It's absolutely insane.
Yeah, so I have experienced that. Not as a therapist. I've experienced that just as a friend, as a reference on people's shidduch resumes. And I've heard the craziest questions, like really, really ridiculous questions.
Love to hear all of them.
Oh my gosh.
You don't,
So,
well, if you remember one.
I mean, there were so many, like, so many just like really irrelevant questions. I remember one of my friends, someone called me about, and they said something like, I think they were trying to figure out how feminine she was, and it was someone said that she was into sports, and they got really upset, and they were like, but is she manly? And he was just asking like really weird questions.
Oh, like is she buff? Like is she
No,
like
I think it's like, is she a tomboy?
Yeah, it was more
oh.
along those lines. And
Mm-hmm.
I was like, you can be into sports and you can still be feminine. Anyway, basically, we went back and forth for a bit, and I was like, this is a really weird conversation. Like, I don't understand the contradiction. A girl can like sports and be beautiful and feminine. Like, what's the difference?
Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
finally, I remember he was like, okay, but would she wear heels on a first date? And I
Mm-hmm.
just remember being so irritated, and I regretted it later, but I just remember saying to him, like, I don't know, I haven't been on a first date with her recently.
Nice.
And I was just so fed up. And I think he was trying to get at, you know, I don't know what he was trying to get at. I think he also had no experience with women. I think he had no idea what he was doing. Um, and my friend is married with many, many kids now, so it's fine. But I think, yeah, it's just it's such a stupid question, and I remember like really giving him Musser about it. I don't know who this guy was, but he got an earful. And I was like, a lot of girls don't wear heels on first dates, not because they're not feminine, but maybe they have ankle problems. Maybe they don't like heels. Maybe they're afraid they're going to be taller than the guy. Maybe they don't know if the guy's going to take her on a 3 hour walk through Central Park. Like, how on earth could you judge someone on that? And at the end, he apologized and he's like, I didn't think of that. And, I think I think sometimes guys are just quite silly. I
Clueless.
think,
Yeah.
yeah, I also don't know how much of it is planted by the moms, although I can't imagine why a mother would put that into their kid's head. So yeah, I don't know.
This is amazing because when I think this is also part of the problem that no one speaks up when they get asked, and I'm really happy you did, and he realized what he did was wrong. Because I think what happens, and correct me if I'm wrong, but someone who's calling up a reference and saying, what's this girl's dress size? They genuinely think that's okay to ask. Because if they didn't, they would never ask it. And I think what happens is they just say, like, they either answer the question, which is absolutely insane if you actually answer that question. In my opinion, you should say, go screw yourself. That's a ridiculous question. Never call me again. I think would be a great response. Maybe not in that tone, but that's what I would do. But I think the way you handled it was great. You did it in a nice way, but just to skip over, like, this is not a good question, right? Do you think
Yeah, I
that, like, people are too nice? I feel like they just let people walk all over them. I don't know.
yeah, I think the other thing that I remember, I don't know if Sarah, this happened when I lived with you, so I don't know if you remember, but I remember one guy, we were having a conversation maybe at a meal, and he said something kind of along the lines of like, I don't know, like I would want someone who wears like a size small. And I remember going into my closet and like pulling out some like dress or shirt that was it was a size XL or something.
Yeah.
I showed it to him and I was like, what size do you think this is? And
Oh
he's
my
like,
God.
I think that's a small. Like a small girl would wear that. And I was like, but this is an extra large. And he was
Yeah.
so shocked. And I think it's just sizes are so stupid in general because it depends on the brand. Sometimes, something shrinks or the
Hmm.
branding is off, and you could have five shirts that are the same size and they're all different
And
sizes.
it
So,
just goes to show he has no idea what he's talking about. When he
yeah,
says
he
size
did.
small, he doesn't know what he has no concept of size small. He may like
No,
a
and
smaller girl, but he doesn't know what size small means.
yeah, and he's one of the nicest guys I know, and he was just like, "Oh my gosh, I'm so mad at men who ask this now because it's so crazy and it's such a pressure on girls. Like, if this is what a large looks like, then what
Hmm.
is a small?" And I was like, "It's probably for a 5-year-old." So
Yeah.
yeah, I think you definitely have to kind of just speak up a bit. Not that they
Yeah.
all
Maybe
want
not
to
quite
hear
in my
it,
tone,
but
but you do it in a much better way.
yeah, I
Uh,
don't think they all want to hear it, but I think it's important to
Someone
just,
has to tell them.
Because
I
yeah,
think someone has to
I
tell
think
them.
if people
So
just continue to let it go, it's going to continue to go. Like this guy has a completely different perspective now on this.
hopefully,
No, I mean,
hopefully.
clearly he has different perspective, but people think it's okay to ask this stuff. It's like,
yeah, I don't know. Yeah, I don't know. I have no answer as to why it's socially acceptable to ask, but
But Elizabeth, I did want to ask you even further that because like shidduch dating itself, and then also just dating in general, even modern Orthodox dating, yeshivish dating, any type of serious dating, I would say, like the shidduch system itself, and if you go through any type of shadchan, is so focused, they hyper focus, I think, on looks. And then also just in general, dating is very stressful and you do want to look your best. So there's a lot of triggers that um can like happen to somebody and they are not really so aware that this could be happening. And I was just wondering if the shidduch system itself like sets those triggers up and people may just not know about that. And so I just wanted your opinion about that as well. And I had mentioned disordered eating, and also eating disorders as well.
right. So I mean, I feel like there's a few different questions within that. Um,
Okay.
yeah, I feel like there's a lot of topics in that kind of question that are a bit separate. So I'm just gonna look. I took a few notes just to kind of separate them out. But I think in general, I think in general, but by nature, eating disorders, all of them, anorexia, binge eating, bulimia, all of the other ones, they are all comorbid with anxiety and depression. So, like, you don't usually get someone with an eating disorder who doesn't have any anxiety or low mood. And some of that is, I think, partially physical because when somebody is malnourished, their brain isn't going to work properly. And people often think malnourished is just anorexia, but it can be someone who has binge eating disorder who never eats real food, but only eats, potato chips and chocolate. They also can be just as malnourished because their brain just isn't getting proper nutrients. So I think, yeah, I think for a normal person with no eating issues, I think that it would be totally normal to react to dating with anxiety and depression because if you think about it, it's such a hard thing to go through and I think that sometimes we think in terms of mental health, is this a normal reaction to the circumstance? And I think that anxiety and depression can be normal reactions to dating because it's exhausting and it's draining. And, if you can imagine, like you're putting yourself out there and then you're being vulnerable and you're showing somebody who you are, and then you get rejected, let's say over and over again. It's really painful. Like most people wouldn't just be like, okay, I'm fine. Or on the flip side, even if you're the one doing the rejecting, it can be exhausting because, you know, you're putting a lot of time, you're putting a lot of energy, money, all of that. And you might get really depressed just feeling like, well, I get dates all the time, but none of them go anywhere. I'm never going to find somebody. And I think that those thoughts are so depressing. And whether you're the person rejecting or being rejected, I think it is normal. And it's obviously normal to think like, will this person like me? Am I pretty enough for them? Am I, smart enough for them? Even if it's not about looks, it might just be like, oh my gosh, this guy is so smart. Obviously, he doesn't think I'm smart enough. Or, he's so accomplished and I'm not, or whatever it might be. Or even on the flip side of like, maybe I'm too smart and maybe, I think that I saw on one of the podcasts you guys did about like high achieving women. So like it could be on the flip side too. But yeah, I definitely think so. Given, everything I just said, those are concerns that somebody would have even without an eating disorder. So I think obviously with an eating disorder, when your brain is not working the way it should, it definitely has that added dimension. And I think also, as I mentioned, like with, let's say, going to Shabbos meals or something with an eating disorder, going on a date is so stressful because you can imagine, like, especially, I mean, I guess it depends on what kind of dating you're doing, but it usually involves food at some point. I remember sometimes going on dates and like the guy never told me where we were going, and I just didn't even know what to expect. And then, if you have an eating disorder and a guy says, okay, I'm going to pick you up at this time, they might be thinking like, well, it's dinner time. Is he going to take me to dinner? But then he's going to notice that I don't eat. He's going to ask if I have an eating disorder, or, maybe, you know, what should I choose? If I order a salad, he'll think that I have an eating disorder. If I order something else, he's going to think I have no self-control. You can just imagine like the mental torture that they would go through. Um, and even I have patients who are not Jewish, who are in established relationships, some of whom haven't told the guy that they have an eating disorder, and they torture themselves and their brains just don't shut off of like, has he noticed this? Has he not noticed this? Like, does he think it's weird? If I told him, would he break up with me because it's a really big deal? So I don't know if I'm answering the question, but I definitely think it's normal to be anxious in dating. It's also normal to feel depressed in dating. But I think with an eating disorder, it definitely is a different level. And then if someone
Yeah.
critiques how you look, or even not critiques, but even if someone compliments your looks, that can also be a trigger for a lot of people, that people don't really realize. So I know earlier in the conversation we were talking about, um, Shadchanim saying, making comments about someone being overweight, but actually making comments about someone being really thin or really beautiful can also have similar effect. I know, like, I have a patient, or not anymore, but a few years ago, I had a patient who was literally like objectively stunning, worked as a model, was beautiful. And when I asked her kind of how her eating disorder developed, she said her whole life people just complimented how she looked. She always was really thin, really beautiful naturally. And she said, eventually I realized that so many people put so much emphasis on my looks. Like, what if suddenly I didn't look like that? And she's like, it scared me so much because that's how people valued me. And it was so obvious that that's how people valued me, because people would go to her parents and say like, oh my gosh, you're so lucky. Your daughter is so beautiful and she's so slim and, she has such a great figure. And this girl basically started, you know, dieting, and she didn't need to, but she developed this horrible eating disorder, even though she knew she was beautiful, because she suddenly felt this huge pressure to keep it up. So I think it's just really important, for whoever's listening to realize that commenting on people's appearance either way or on their weight can be really damaging. So even just saying like, oh, you've lost weight, you look amazing. it sounds like it's nice, but then what people often hear is, well, obviously you think I looked horrible before.
What about if you
Right.
just compliment someone and say, like, I think you look great without mentioning anything about weight or anything? What about something like that?
Yeah, so that's my go-to. If I comment on someone's appearance, I would just say like, you look really beautiful, or like, this dress really suits you, or something like that.
Hmm.
Something that's
You
like
wouldn't go like into
completely,
specifically like about their weight or like
no.
their appearance, just a very general, like, you look so good. Wow, you look great
I'm
today.
Yeah, I might say something like, your skin looks really glowy or something. I mean, that sounds really awkward, but something like that. But I personally make it a rule, just because of the things I've heard from patients, not to ever say like, you know, have you lost weight? You look amazing, or like anything like that. I just don't say that. And if someone does say to me like, oh, like, have you noticed I lost weight? I'll just be like, oh no, but like, how do you feel? And if they say like, yeah,
Mm,
I feel really great, then I'll just say, great, amazing. I'm so happy. You look great, but I think you looked great before, or something to try and kind of like take the emphasis off of the importance of the weight.
hmm. It's so funny. It's so funny that you say that, because when I was dating, and I was kind of at the lowest weight I've ever been. I think it was like a mixture of a lot of things. And I went shopping, and it was at a From store, and I tried something on, and I was like, I don't I don't look good. Like, I genuinely was like, I'm way too thin. Like, this is the thinnest I've ever been. And like, I really have to just kind of hone in on what's going on. At that exact moment, this woman came in, and she was like, you look so good. Like, you look like the perfect type of girl dating right now. Like, you look so good. And I didn't know if she was just like, trying to sell me the outfit, or if she was just trying to like, she could have just been trying to sell me the outfit or trying to make me feel good. I don't know if she saw me just looking at myself. But at that moment, I was conflicted. I was like, I obviously have some type of disordered eating right now. Like, there's something going on. Like, I don't know how to like express it, but I was like, but she's telling me I look good, but I don't feel good. And I know I don't look healthy, but she's telling me I look good. So it was like a very like conflicting um feeling, I would say. So it's interesting you bring that up, because I'm sure a lot of girls like go through that, either, on any side.
Yeah, I think also, yeah, I think there's a really big disconnect. And like, I don't even want to get into this because it would be like a 2 hour long conversation, if not longer, but
Yeah.
between kind of like health and your looks. And, your looks don't indicate health. There are, so many people just assume that they can tell how healthy you are based on your weight. And it's so not true. And there are so many, slim people who, like, I've had patients who are like personal trainers and work in gyms, and everyone's like, what's your secret? You're so healthy. And they are so sick. And, they have problems with their hearts, and they have so many
Or,
issues, but you
Mhm.
can't see it. And at the same time, like, I have patients who have, thank God, recovered. And, people thought they were at their healthiest when they were at their lowest weights, and they were, you know, on the edge of dying because they were so sick, and you just can't
Yeah.
see it. And I think people assume also that if someone's a little bit chubby or overweight at all, they're in poor health, and it's not true. Um, so I think, yeah, it can be really damaging when I have patients who they finally get on board with like getting better and, treatment. And then someone will say to them, like, oh my gosh, you look so amazing. And it undoes all of that
Right.
progress. So
Yeah.
yeah, I think just avoiding talking about people's weight is really important.
But
Yeah, and
in that case, are you referring to they mentioned weight or just you look great?
Yeah, just like the weight and
Right,
size.
right,
You can say like you look beautiful,
right,
um, but I would just avoid, yeah, avoid
yeah.
specifics about weight unless like maybe you're married to the person, and even then I would probably avoid it.
right.
Um, I wanted to ask you, Elizabeth, what are some like signs for somebody who's listening to this episode and wants to get like some advice on what are first signs of um having either like an eating disorder, disordered eating, and if somebody knows somebody who's going through something very difficult, how they can help them or ways for them to be helped.
So, I mean, it depends, I think, what country someone's in. If they're in America, they can go on like the NEDA website, NEDA. It's the National Eating Disorders Association, and there's tons of resources there for like supporting someone with an eating disorder. If you think you have an eating disorder, all of that. And there's helplines that are anonymous. There's tons of stuff there. So I would say, to try that first. They could
Mm,
also go on like Psychology Today and look for a therapist. But NEDA is a really good resource in
mm,
America.
mm.
For other countries, you can like message me. But in terms of warning signs, I think again, it's hard because I can give you some warning signs, but I think that it's very hard. You don't always see an eating disorder, and I think the most obvious sign is if someone looks underweight. But even if someone's underweight, you can never assume they have an eating disorder because they might have, Crohn's, they might have, some other kind of medical issue that makes them lose weight. They might, God forbid, be going, undergoing cancer treatment. There's so many other things that can make somebody underweight. So I think just like never assume if you see somebody who's very thin, like, oh, so do you have, you have anorexia? Do you want to talk about it? Because it's
Right.
it's not a safe assumption to make.
Right.
Um, and on the same note, I think if somebody has bulimia or binge eating disorder, you often can't see it because they aren't usually at a very low weight. So it can literally be anyone. And, something just kind of going back. Sorry, this is like switching topics, but
That's okay.
going back to, the conversation about, perfectionism and having to cook and then look a certain way is that another symptom of eating disorders is often like this obsession with cooking and food. And very often you find that people who love baking and love cooking and they post about it, very often they actually might have an eating disorder. And it's weird, psychologically how it works, but just you can never really assume because you might think somebody who loves talking about food loves eating, um, which would make sense, but it's often not the case. So just kind of like being careful about assumptions. But I would say the warning signs are, again, you can't assume anything based on these, but just some things to look out for. I would say are restriction, restricting food groups. So, but again, this is unfortunately very commonplace for, people, especially let's say like a frum girl dating to be like, oh, I'm not eating carbs or, I'm going keto or
Right.
whatever it might be. But that is a warning sign when someone is restricting food groups.
Hmm.
Um, that's a big one. I would say if you notice that they're very fixated on their looks, but again, they might not be openly sharing that with you. So it's hard to say. Um, if they are kind of retreating from things, if they're, normally a very social person and they're not, going out, um, it might be an eating issue, it might be just anxiety or depression or, something else. But I would say those are a few things to just kind of look out for.
Hmm.
if a girl doesn't eat, like you go out to dinner and the girl just like doesn't eat, is that like a telltale sign, or that's like just normal? Or
I mean, I think it's very common for girls not to eat much on a date, especially
Especially if it's
because,
like the second date.
yeah, especially if it's like, I once read a dating book and I think it said something like, never eat these foods on a date because then like the food will be stuck in your teeth or this will happen or that will happen. And like it's such nonsense, but I think people probably do buy into that, like spilling things on themselves. So I think that girls very often will just eat like a salad on a date, just because also because of all the pressure about being thin, a lot of them, and this isn't me, like I never did this, but a lot of them aren't gonna order something, let's say like a pizza or a burger, because
right?
in their
It's like
minds,
messy.
No, but
not even messy, but in their minds, I think that because of all the pressures of looks and being thin, they're probably thinking like, I don't want this guy to
right,
think that, you
Mm,
know, I don't want to say fat because I don't want to use it as
right,
a
right,
negative term, but
right.
I think that's often what people think. Or, sometimes if they have like a lot of anxiety or whatever, they might be like, oh, he's judging what I'm eating. Or, sometimes if the guy orders something, the girl doesn't want to order something that's like bigger than what he's eating. So I think I wouldn't take anything from it. Um, I definitely wouldn't take anything from it. But you could like encourage her, like not force her, but encourage her, be like, oh, like, are you sure you just want a salad? Like,
I've done it. I've done it. I
you know,
remember taking somebody,
Or you could be like, hey, do you want to split a pizza? Like,
like,
I'm not gonna eat this whole pizza. Do you want to split a pizza?
I remember taking a girl out to Mr. Broadway, and we, what's it called? I love the soup there, the matzo ball soup, phenomenal. We both got the soup, and I'm like, okay, what else do you want? She's like, oh no, I'm good. I'm like, no, it's okay, get whatever, it's fine, no problem. She's like, no, I'm good. I'm like, listen, you can get whatever you want. I'll take care of it. No, I literally was trying to push. I'm like, please just buy something. I'm paying for it. Like, what? I'm just, She's like, no. I'm like, you know what? Screw this. I ended up buying a steak and just eating it in front of. She just looked at me eat,
Oh
whatever.
my
But
God.
that's happened for sure.
yeah.
Oh
So
my
I
God.
would say try to like strike the balance of like encouraging her to like understand that it's okay for her to eat, but without forcing it. Because just in case she does have an eating disorder and like eating more than a matzo ball would, put her over the edge, you don't want to like force her because it might not have, great consequences. But I think just making it like normal to eat
How
is
do you
is
say it in
good.
like a nice, like, I'm like, I don't think you can say like, I'm not judging you. Like, I feel like that's not a smart move. Like, what would you say exactly so that I know?
Gosh, I don't know. I don't know. Sarah, what would you say?
Um, well, it could be, that she ate before the date. I don't
How
know if
would you
she knew
eat before a
exactly.
date? Like,
Did she know that you were taking her out
of course, I
to
always tell my dates where we're
to
going.
Mr. Broadway? Okay,
Yes.
fine. So she knew that she was eating out. Honestly, maybe she wasn't that hungry.
No, it's okay.
Sometimes like people
Might
are
also
not
be
that, I don't
nervous.
know.
Sometimes,
She could be
sometimes nerves,
nervous.
I want
sometimes
Like if
nerves
you
can make you nauseous.
I was also trying to push the fact that you don't even have to eat it. We'll take it to go. Like, just, I don't know, like, because it's like
I,
awkward watching me eat or
I
whatever. Like,
think I think if we're like, okay, well, I understand you may not be so hungry right now. Do you mind if like I order just because I'm really hungry? Like, is it okay that I eat? If you're not gonna
well,
get anything, is that okay?
I'm not going to
I
ask her
think,
that because screw her for, of course,
oh,
I'm not going to ask for
okay,
permission if
well,
I
there
can
you
order
go.
food on a date.
That's what I would have done. I
I
wouldn't
would
have
not
put
have
any
asked.
pressure on her. I would not put any
I,
pressure on her.
I didn't.
I would just ask her if she was comfortable with me eating.
And what if she
Um,
said no? And what if she
if
said
she said no, that's actually good in my opinion. I think that's very good
no?
because
Meaning,
now
I'm
you
sorry.
know.
What if she said like I would have a problem with you ordering?
Right. If she said that she would have a problem with you ordering,
I would
I
just
feel like, okay, you know who she is.
I would tell her to
And
leave, and I would still continue to eat.
Okay, you tell her to leave. I would be like, okay, maybe we should go on a walk, and then that that's just not a girl for you. I don't know. What do you think, Elizabeth? I just want to push it on her to be like, you
I
have
wouldn't,
to buy
I
something,
wouldn't say
we're
it's
here.
like I'm not trying to push it, but by the way, the tone that I'm talking to you now is not the tone I would say on a date. The way I said on a date, it was more like, it's okay. Yeah, I'm taking, you can get
Yeah,
whatever you want.
you're probably trying to be very courteous. Like
I
you're
was trying
probably
because
like,
I felt like maybe she didn't want to order. I get that. So I was trying to, encourage her to order something. Like it could be anything, whatever, just
right. I
whatever.
don't know. Maybe she just didn't feel comfortable. I'm not so sure. But I personally wouldn't. I'd be like, okay, like, do you mind if
I
I
still
order
won't
since
ask.
I
It's
am
true.
hungry?
I'm still
Okay,
not going to ask
fine.
because I'm still
Don't
going to
ask.
order. So
Yeah,
whatever.
Okay.
I guess I would just kind of tread carefully on the first few dates. I wouldn't push too much, but I would just make them, comfortable if they want to eat something that's more than like a salad. Um, just be like, are you sure that's all you want? I'm gonna order something. I would love it, if you eat with me, but if not, that's cool. If it's after the first few dates and you start seeing like, she never eats with you or, you know, always makes different excuses up or, whatever, whatever signs you might think could be an eating issue, I would say still tread carefully, but if it's enough dates that you feel it's serious, you can either ask, depending on your circles, but you could either ask her carefully or maybe ask, one of her references if you're in that kind of world, or, just kind of maybe ask like a female friend or therapist, rabbi type person,
Mhm.
um, if you're really concerned about it. But I do think it is pretty common for girls not to eat much on dates, partially because of nerves and partially because they think the guy will take something from it about them.
It's funny. I'm actually going to plug in here that we actually have a merch store. We actually started selling shirts. And one of the shirts that I made, the line was, women spend more time thinking about what men are thinking than men actually spend thinking.
Yeah, that's definitely true.
It's definitely true.
That is true.
But Elizabeth, thank you so much. This was fantastic. And
Pleasure.
I did want to say that Max actually printed out one of your articles.
What was it?
Well, I have it right here.
Um,
Yeah.
yeah,
It
he
was
was like,
talking
Sarah, I
about
printed out a fabulous
when
article,
asking
and I
for
was
a woman's
like,
dress size becomes the norm.
Oh
This
my
was said in
gosh.
February of 2018.
yeah.
My gosh,
I was
I don't
like,
even
Max,
remember what
I'm
I
pretty
wrote. It was
sure.
so long ago.
This
I was
was
like, I'm
so
pretty
great. This
sure
is like even
Elizabeth
before I
wrote
started
something
talking
like
about it.
that.
What'd you say?
I said to you, I said to Max, I was like, I'm pretty sure, like, make sure Elizabeth is on there because I'm pretty sure she wrote a couple
It's on it
articles.
right here.
And
Yeah.
he was like, oh my gosh, she is on
Yeah,
there.
I actually didn't know it was yours
Oh wait, you
before.
didn't realize it was
I didn't
mine.
realize it was yours. No. It's really cool.
No.
Oh, I did write that. I actually don't even remember what I wrote.
I
Where was
love
it?
this. This is great. Where did I find it?
Yeah, was it
Uh,
just online?
it's online.
Oh my gosh, I literally
Nefesh.org.
don't even remember what I wrote.
Nefesh.org.
Oh,
I would definitely
Nefesh.org.
remember this if I wrote this because this is like a big deal. I talk about this a lot. The whole dress size thing just rubs me the wrong way completely. And this is coming from a guy.
Yeah, it's
It's
not a
stupid.
good thing to ask. I think that the
Yeah.
other thing that is problematic about it is when shadchanim push you to lose weight for dating, even if let's say a girl does lose the weight, you often see like someone who loses a lot of weight for dating, not in the healthiest way, and then the guy falls for her, marries her, and then within like 6 months she's gained all of it back plus more, and suddenly like the guy doesn't know what he was in for, which I'm not saying gaining weight is a problem, but when you kind of try to like hide who you are and fit into this mold,
Hmm.
it's I feel like it's better to not lose the weight and have a guy who marries you because he likes you. And if at some point you decide to like make health changes and you lose weight, then fine. But I think it's really dangerous to just, like mold yourself into something when you're dating and then it doesn't really make for a good marriage. And I think shadchanim, not just shadchanim, but I think people leave that out. And
Mhm.
often,
It's a
young
good point.
girls are not, I
So
don't want to say young girls are stupid, but they don't
no,
always,
it's just a vulnerable position. Like
yeah,
I was there at 21. I'm not going to mention certain things for whatever reason, but I was vulnerable too. We believe whatever we're told because you don't really think you're not really thinking for yourself at that time. You think like whoever your mentor is, if they tell you jump off a building, I say, when would you like me to do it? That's just the way it is. I wouldn't necessarily blame them. It's just so I think we can all agree that most shadchanim are terrible at what they do. Yep. I don't know if you might agree with that or not, but I'm just going to say it anyways. Just, I like to
I
be
think I think a
controversial.
lot of them are amazing and well-meaning.
Well-meaning. Like I feel like this is the only
Guys, it's her opinion. She's
fine,
saying that they're
fine. All right,
well-meaning.
go
She's
ahead.
allowed to say that.
I can't say for everyone, but I think a lot are well-meaning. And sometimes it's kind of misguided the way that they go about it. But some of them also might just be jaded after, 30 years of seeing boys say no, 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 want someone thinner. It might just be kind of second nature to them to be like, you need to lose weight because guys won't say yes, which
Mhm.
again, it's not right. And I don't think it's okay on any level, but I it's hard. I think some of them are just a bit harsh.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I yeah. Yeah.
Well,
It's
thanks again, Elizabeth. We really appreciate you taking up
guys.
your time.
Yeah.
We're
Thank
in
you.
3 different time zones, everyone. Just letting everyone know,
Where
and
are
we were
you
able to
located?
make it work.
Hmm?
Where are you located?
London.
Oh, London. Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Yeah, we got
Sorry.
London,
Sorry.
Israel, and Teaneck.
My timing is very off because during the day I'm either working or if I'm not working, then my kids are awake and I didn't think you wanted them on the podcast.
Oh, I'm sure they would have
And
been cute. Cute on
they
podcast. We
maybe.
have we have kid merch.
Do you? What does
Yeah.
it say?
I wrote it. I'm like ready for Shidduchim. I'm
Oh
ready
my
for
gosh.
Shidduchim.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh.
We'll send you the link. But anyways, Elizabeth, thank you so much. We really appreciate your
Thank
time.
you guys.
And
It's
as
so
always,
nice
you
to
have
see
so
you.
much, yeah, you have really good opinions and you have such an education in this background that we really do appreciate what you have to say. So we appreciate your time.
Yes,
Thank
definitely. Thank
you.
you.
All right. Thanks,
All
guys.
right,
Have a good
guys.
Shabbos. Talk to
You
you
Yeah, guys.
soon.
too.
All right.
Bye.
Bye, everyone.
And remember, everything will always be about Shidduchim. Catch you in the next episode.